City Strategy Committee business that we need to carry out. So I'll adjourn. Just a quick note that both meetings are being recorded today, live, and note that, please. Madam Chair.
Sorry, thank you, Mayor Lester, and welcome to this morning's City Strategy Committee meeting. It seems that Councillor Foster is late, so Councillor Day, could you do the mihi, please?
I sure can. Mōrena koutou. Te wero, toitu te marae tāne, toitu te marae tangaroa, toitu te iwi. Tai o puneke, kia kākama, kia maia. Ngā tātou o puneke, me noho ngā tahi, whaia te aratika.
Kia ora. I've got apologies on council business from Councillor Young, and I've also got apologies from Councillor Calvert. So can I have a seconder for those apologies, please? Thank you, Councillor Gilbert. So I'll move in those, and they've been seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Oh, I suppose we should actually. Do we need to for the apologies? Yes. So if you could just all press the green button now. Oh, it's not set up. Sorry. It is now? Lovely. Thank you. Right. Councillor Sparrow. Please, just do it again. No, just... Okay, so we've got everyone? Thank you very much. Okay, so conflict of interest declarations, any to declare? And the confirmation of minutes, I'd like to move those from the 20th of September. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Day. You seem to be, that's your job. Thank you very much. Okay, so any debate on those? Okay, so can we vote on them? Thank you very much. Right, all done? Thank you very much. Okay, so no items not on the agenda, no changes to the order of the agenda. So we now have public participation. So welcome to the public participants. I did have one member of the public who wanted to come today. Unfortunately, she's ill, so I've said she can come to the next meeting. So Ms. Kelly Watkins on the lease of Arlington, welcome to you. Oh, sorry, yes, you can come forward either to this chair here or you can come to the front. What are you most comfortable with?
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Kelly Watkins. I'm just here to briefly talk about the subsidy issue with tenants. So I've been a city housing tenant since 2013. Prior to that, my son and I were homeless. We had no choice but to spend a year living in a camping ground. I've survived domestic violence, battled anxiety, depression and PTSD. I'm also innately aware of and very personally acquainted with how dysfunctional and discriminatory the current social welfare system is. But I'm also a Massey University student on the brink of graduating with a Bachelor of Arts degree majoring in social policy, and the focus of my social policy research and evaluation course paper this year is the Council's Housing Service Report. So I'm here today to briefly address some of my key findings. City housing tenants are an ethnically and socially diverse group of residents. Many are elderly, refugees, migrants. They live with physical and learning disabilities and suffer from long-term chronic health problems, including mental health and addiction issues. Many of us have first-hand life experience of inequality, poverty, homelessness, trauma, discrimination and social exclusion. According to Council's Service Policy of 2010, over 80% of council tenants are work and income beneficiaries. And the largest priority group of city housing customers, a group that comprises 38% status, are categorised as multiple disadvantaged. An external operational review of City Housing revealed that 2/3 of tenants are paying well over 35% of their income on rent. So it's imperative that Council acknowledge that the incremental annual rent rises in line with the 70% market rate are financially crippling low-income tenants. City Housing tenants are not eligible for the government's income-related rent subsidy, like Housing New Zealand tenants are. If we were, we too would not pay more than 25% of our incomes on rent. I wrote to the Minister for Housing, Phil Twyford, asking him why his so-called compassionate government has chosen not to fulfil its pre-election promise to extend the income-related rent subsidy to council tenants, and I have brought copies of his official response if anyone cares to read it. Like most tenants I know, I pay more than 50% of my supported living benefit on rent. After this month's annual rent hike I applied for, and I was granted the council's own affordable rent subsidy. As a result of that, work and income significantly reduced my accommodation supplement, and they scrapped my temporary additional support altogether. If I had not immediately cancelled the subsidy, I would have been worse off than I was prior to accepting it. That's because there's an anomaly between the council's rent subsidy and work and income policy that effectively penalises tenants for accessing it. So I'm asking council here and now to take some initiative, and on behalf of your most vulnerable tenants, please make steps to engage with the Ministry of Social Development to remedy the problem for those of us who do qualify. As it stands, council offers an ineffective subsidy that only working tenants can actually benefit from. I'm aware that the 2010 service policy is 3 years overdue an update, and that City Housing is currently researching options to take back to council to make its council policy fairer and more sustainable. I cannot stress how fundamentally important it is that this process does involve consultation and engagement with tenants. It is critical that tenants are able to contribute to and participate in decision making that affects them. I strongly believe it's in the council's best interest to establish a recognised tenant representation group as a formal joint voice of the tenants to the council, and I intend to keep pushing for one. Thank you for your time.
Can I just thank you for sharing your story and how impressed I am by your strength. And so good luck and congratulations on all your achievements.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Lester, he's just got a question.
We've just got some questions, Kelly. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us, and congratulations on the great job you're doing with your studies and looking after yourself and your son as well.
Thank you.
I have to ask a question so rather than making a statement. So are you aware that the council is advocating strongly for income-related rents for council tenants?
Yes, I know that, and I know that the response from Phil Twyford is that it will not be something that this government, this term, will look at. So that's why I've actually brought that letter along. It sort of goes into more detail.
Okay. And secondly, what kind of difference would it make for you and your son if you were able to receive that income-related rent subsidy?
So it's just me. My son's now 24.
Okay.
Yeah. What difference would it make? It would make a huge difference to not only my life but all the tenants, because, as I said, the incremental increases that keep happening to keep in line with the 70% market rate is just becoming out of the realm of what most people, especially if their main source of income is a benefit, can actually afford. Yeah. So I know that it's hurting a lot of people that I know personally within the complex I'm in and elsewhere. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and
Okay.
thanks for your insights.
All right.
Thank you very much again. Right, and now Ms. Bridget Baker on the same paper. A warm welcome to you as well.
Hi, I'm Bridget. I just first of all just want to say I'm speaking personally, although I have been contributing as part of Mount Cook Mobilised and a smaller group, hanky cares. The only reason I'm not speaking on behalf is because I'm renovating my house and haven't had time to collaborate enough to say I can speak on people's behalf, although I will reflect some things that we shared in the last meeting that we had when we were consulted by council. First thing I want to say about Arlington site is just want to restate the vitality of the site for the city, and the value of having this whole mix of people visible in our city, in the centre of our city, where we don't hide away any parts of the things we need to be addressing and integrating as a whole community, and also the proximity for work and for all the kinds of jobs that people do fulfil here, and the services that people who are in need to access. So I want to just the value of that really endorse. The paper says that the community voice was generally supportive of this plan. I just want to say a couple of other things that the community voice said that weren't mentioned in this paper. And firstly, I want to say that financially this looks like probably the only viable option at the moment, and it looks generally like a good option. So that is what we feel, and we want to see it remain as social housing. We expressed some concerns about tenants who had been promised to come back and whose lives have been on hold waiting to come back. There were only a few, but particularly the people in most need, so that was a concern expressed. We expressed a concern about the potential for a short-term reduction in overall housing available, because the City Council stats are met by offering them to Housing New Zealand, so therefore they're not then available to meet the housing people in Group A and B who are on your waiting list. So just the awareness of the double up between Housing New Zealand saying we're housing these people and Wellington City Council ticking off the deed as housing these people as well. And the other things, we asked a question about looking for, is there going to be some kind of service agreement with Housing New Zealand? We were told that there wouldn't be, that Housing New Zealand would be free in how they managed that. But we had some concerns about that, particularly how the changeover from Rolleston Street flats might happen, and a drug dealing issue there, those kinds of things, and also how the community services are, what community services will be available. So there was a community room, but it's no longer going to be a community room perhaps. There's going to be offices, and there's maybe 600 people housed there at one possibility. So whether there is still any voice to have in advocating for that while Housing New Zealand has it. And then finally the last thing, so that was the community voice kind of side of things. And then the other thing I want to talk about is the long-term strategy around the whole site, including site 1 and 3 across the road, and the thing for mixed tenure. We were very concerned that there should remain social housing, and if there's affordable housing, then any affordable housing needs a good retainability for affordability, that it doesn't just go off and go to the next highest bidder. And so there is a concern about any part of it going to KiwiBuild, although there is another possibility that I noticed the paper says there are no treaty considerations in this site. However, I would like to consider a treaty opportunity, in that if any part of it is to be sold off or leased to some kind of private thing, that mana whenua group could be consulted, and as was suggested at the opening of Te Mara, the naming of Te Mara, that a potential for an immersion site there, something like that. Notice that you say it's not possible to reduce market rents, and I want to encourage City Council to consider long-term investment in social housing beyond just ring fencing money. that we could consider investing in social housing, rent rebates for the area, so that the cost of that site comes down, no matter who has it, whether it's long-term lease to Housing New Zealand, whether it's income-related rent subsidy. If it's income-related rent subsidy, it's going to be a huge cost to the government to top up to that kind of market rent. But how else can council work to keep the rents down and keep that site as social? Thank you. That's my...
Thank you very much for coming in and for supporting social housing in your community.
Yeah.
Any quick questions? All right, thank you very much again. Right, Councillor Dawson, over to you to introduce the first report.
Thank you very much, and thank you to both Kelly and Bridget for their presentations this morning. I also want to start by extending thanks to our staff. There's been a lot of work that's gone into this project. There's still more work to be done, but there's been a lot of work done. I often think that the most thankless tasks in council must be social housing and parking. So Michelle's had to do both of those. Sucker for punishment, some would say, but she's done a fantastic job, as has her team, in working through this. I do want to say a huge thanks as well to Housing New Zealand. I want to acknowledge Will, Jackie and Martin, who are here this morning from Housing New Zealand. This is something new for us and for them, and it's good to be part of that. And I especially want to acknowledge the Mount Cook community, and particularly the Hankey Street and Arlington residents. Sometimes people don't believe me when I tell them how supportive this community is of social housing. And I know a few months ago when we first had a meeting with the Hankey Street residents, and council staff came along in trepidation, expecting to face some of the usual things we face, they were absolutely shocked at the biggest demand there was that the entire Arlington site remain 100% social housing. These people are staunch advocates of social housing and of city housing in particular, and I want to thank them for that, and I want to thank them for the passion and the interest they continue to show. Some months ago, councillors, we approved the Wellington housing strategy, and that strategy has the overarching goal of seeing all Wellingtonians well housed. This is that strategy. Those of us who got up extremely early in the morning a couple of weeks ago, or a week or so ago, I don't know, it was so early I can't remember how long ago it was, to attend the blessing of Tamara, got to see for ourselves these fantastic new units on what was the Arlington 2 site. And anyone who had visited that site before it was pulled down, couldn't help but be struck by the absolute transformation of that area. They are wonderful, and they are a sign of what social housing in Wellington is going to look like in the future. And if you think that it's an isolated example, I invite you as well to take a drive up Britomart Street sometime and see what Housing New Zealand's doing in that area. And, you know, the days of cinder block, horrible social housing units are gone. These days we can expect to have safe, warm, dry, resilient housing for our most vulnerable tenants, and thank God for that, I say quite literally. Some will ask then, having done all this work to create this beautiful block, why are we now handing it over to someone else? Well, there are a variety of reasons for that, and they're in the report, and I'm not going to go through the report bit by bit, but I do want to highlight two of them. And the first is quite simply, this is about facilitating an increase in the supply of housing in Wellington. Lots and lots of different people are interested in being involved in leasing city housing units and in looking after our units and our people, but very few of them actually want to go out and build new houses. And quite frankly, what we need in Wellington is more houses, and particularly more social houses and affordable houses. This is about facilitating increasing the supply of housing. Housing New Zealand are very active in this space, and seldom do we see a public organisation do such a massive turnaround in such a short period of time as we've seen in the housing sector in the past 12 months. And Godspeed to them. This is going to be an interesting time for social housing in the city, and increasing supply is going to be one aspect of that. So that's one reason why we're doing this. The second is all about partnership. If we are going to achieve the goal we've set in our housing strategy, then we are going to have to work with everyone involved in housing in Wellington to do it. We cannot do it by ourselves as council. No one else can do it by themselves either. A week ago, we launched the first of the apartment conversion projects, a great step forward in that particular plan too, partnering with a prominent local developer to get that done. That's another example of the partnerships we're going to have to work with. We're already working with several community housing providers in this space, partnership work with them. We're working in partnership with those involved in trying to end homelessness in Wellington. Partnership is the way we have to work, and this establishes a new partnership with the largest landlord in the country. And so what we have here is the second biggest landlord joining forces with the biggest landlord to ensure that the most vulnerable Wellingtonians are indeed well housed. Ultimately, though, this is a short-term lease. I've spoken this morning with Housing New Zealand, and thanks to Jackie and Martin for taking a few moments to talk. Yesterday, when we had the workshop, we talked about why the length of that lease term is not being specified in the paper. There are reasons for that. Housing New Zealand wants to have a chance to speak to their tenants before we make some of those terms public, and they're going to be doing that over the next month. And then once those tenants have been talked to, the ones who are likely to be housed at this block, then we will make public the length of this lease term. But we're not going to do that today, so that those tenants are the first to hear it rather than others. So, anyone who's involved in the housing game knows that housing is not a short-term game. I've learnt that the hard way in the last 12 months. It takes time to build homes, and it takes time to do the planning. In the long haul, though, this will contribute to increasing social housing in Wellington, and let's face it, that is the big goal. It's not about who the landlord is, it's about how many of our most vulnerable citizens actually have good, safe, resilient, warm houses to live in. And that's what we're about here. So it's good to be working together. I commend these recommendations to you colleagues for your approval, and I do hope that someone will sit down and second me.
Melissa, I was just going to ask if you wanted to. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Dawson. I want to acknowledge the Housing New Zealand staff here. Thank you for your attendance, and also to our own staff who've put into many hours of hard work. Just in terms of the decision, look, for us, this is a win-win-win. It's one of those relatively rare situations where you've got three parties essentially benefiting from a transaction with good outcomes for all. It's a win for our tenants, and it's a win for Wellington City Council and our role as provider of public housing. It's a win for our tenants because they get access to income-related rents, as we've just heard from Kelly. It'll make an enormous difference to the people living there who otherwise would have been on council rent at a 30% discount to market, but significantly more affordable for them by accessing those income-related rents at no more than 25% of their income. It's a win for Wellington City Council because we have an important role to provide public housing. It allows us to do more to assist those that are in need, that are vulnerable, and ultimately to provide more homes. And it's a win for Housing New Zealand as well because they get access to high quality, centrally located dwellings to also meet their need and desire to house more Wellingtonians, and also allow them to develop other locations within the city. I just want to maintain that broader picture that Brian referred to as well. This is one piece only of a much larger puzzle. Our desire is to be more active in the development and growth of social housing in the city. It's not enough to just rest on our laurels. It's not enough to say we're maintaining city housing within Wellington. It's not enough for us to say we're proud to be the second largest landlord in the country if we're not doing anything to grow as the city grows. If we want to be the most livable city in the world, we need to be livable for all Wellingtonians and not just those that can afford to live here. We've talked about the private sector development that's occurring, the iwi development, the apartment conversions, the housing first approach that we're taking together with the third sector as well. But this is an important part that we continue to grow the public housing that we have on our books. This is a good transaction to help get us there. Kia ora mai tātou.
Thank you, Councillor Calvi Freeman. Did you wish to speak? No, does anyone else wish to? Can I just briefly speak? I'd just like to support the comments of my colleagues. Thanks to staff, both at Wellington City Council and to central government as well. This is a fantastic win, so I'm very grateful. And of course to my colleagues who are working so hard to get housing happening. Councillor Dawson, I will just raise a point around who the landlord is. Sometimes it does matter, and I'll just remind you of the history around this place and nationally that, this council did used to just sort of be a landlord. At one time wanted to sell off the housing, and it was only, of course, because of the last Labor government that we got the money injected so we could keep the housing. We've had, the previous government had a different philosophical view about the role it should play in housing. So actually, sometimes it does matter who the landlord is, and it's going to, from my perspective, the best landlord is the one that takes the well-being of the tenant in its entirety, not just providing a roof over the head. And while this council and this government is in alignment, that won't always happen. So I think we always need to be cognizant of that. Look, it's not often I move to tears in public, but I almost was when I heard Ms Watkins. That was very brave of her to come and speak to us and share the reality of her life with us. And ultimately, this is where we need to start from. What is the need? I get a little bit impatient when government agencies, including us, have debates about who should be paying. Why is our policy not aligned with WINS? That is crazy. So hopefully that can be resolved. And really, it doesn't matter, whether it's central or local government paying in a way. Someone's got to pay. We've all got to take responsibility and sort this problem. And Councillor Dawson, I know I've told you before that we did have a report going back now 12 years saying we needed to build more social housing, and this council did not agree with us, and now we've left with this legacy problem. So it's great that you're doing so much work. And just my last point is, look, thank you very much for taking on the concerns around the transparency of this agreement. I appreciate that. My concern is that essentially with this agreement, we are dealing with two public bodies. Full transparency is needed, apart from anything to give certainty to tenants. But, these bodies are supported by ratepayers and taxpayers. They are not commercial entities, and I don't think there is a need for too much sensitivity. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Dawson, right of reply.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor Lester, for your comments. Thank you, Councillor Pannett. You're entirely right. There is not a landlord in existence who does not have a blemished record, ourselves included. What I can say, and yes, it's entirely reliant on the vagaries of a change of government, just as city housing is entirely reliant on the vagaries of changing councillors. What I can say is at this point in time, we are all on the same page. Housing New Zealand and Wellington City Council Housing are all trying to do the same thing, which is to make sure we do the very best by those who find themselves at the very bottom of society's heap. And that's got to be great. Absolutely. Show me the money and I will do it all ourselves, and we'll build hundreds of new social houses and we'll charge no rent. All I need is 8 votes to vote in several $1 billion and we'll be away laughing. Somehow I suspect that won't be the case. I wasn't here when those other votes happened, Councillor Pannett, you were, and going right back to the time of the deed, Councillor Foster was. But what I do know is that at that time, 10 years ago, there was a real possibility that we would get out of the social housing game altogether. For a whole variety of reasons, a lot of them philosophical and some of them practical. I'm pleased we didn't. This is actually about making sure that we can stay in it for the next 50 years, not just for the next 3 years. And so let's do that. Doesn't matter who pays. Well, of course it matters who pays. I'll remind you of that next time you want $100 million for a reservoir. It doesn't matter who pays. We'll let someone else pay for it. But the reality is we all have to do something. We all have to have some skin in the game. And this is about making sure that we are sharing the load. And long may it last.
Thank you. Right, so can you please vote now? Councillor Sparrow, there's something wrong with your machine. Right. Got everyone? Everyone voted. Thank you. Well done, everyone. Right, Councillor Foster, now to introduce your magnus opus.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I will start by, as Councillor Dawson did, thanking the staff who've been involved in this. The fact that it's a very long document tells you it's been a lot of work. It's a lot of work for the whole organisation, but I particularly wanted to thank the finance teams, Andy and Lloyd, who's fronted a lot of this as well, Richard, Bronwyn, the team that have done an absolutely fantastic job, so I want to thank them right up at the start. This is a record of what has been, so it's not about us trying to change things. You might change how you record what has been, particularly in terms of the words that get used to it, used to describe the past. We've been through quite an extensive process as the Finance, Audit and Risk Management Subcommittee, and that includes, remember, 3 external members. So we had 2 workshops, and we did most of the changes in those 2 workshops. Relatively few changes when we actually came to the subcommittee, and then now to this committee. Some of the changes we did make, particularly around some of the wording, where there were mistakes that were noted in the document or wording which could be improved in the document. We particularly wanted to make some of the bits a little less triumphalist, and there were some parts of the document where it was very much as though 2017-18 council was absolutely fantastic, but in all previous years it hadn't been very good. And we said, well, hang on, that's not quite right. For example, in the resilience space, we've kind of only just discovered that there was an earthquake, and the Kaikoura earthquake, and all of a sudden we decided we had to do something about resilience. Well, we all know that's not true, and that the City Council has been a leader in resilience planning and response for decades. So we corrected those kind of things. We also changed some things where there was, particularly in the transport space, there were some of the numbers which actually said that actually we're doing okay. And the numbers came up. You'll see the colour coding there is red is where we're not achieving our target levels, and it's recorded as red. So we said, oh no, hang on, you got that one wrong. So we corrected those things as well. So there's been a lot of work being done in those areas. In terms of, we also added a bit in terms of cross-referencing. So there are, as we know, there are many areas of council where what happens in one area, a classic example will be the town hall. Whichever area you put it in, it affects another area as well of the council's business. The areas where we had the greatest concern in terms of the KPIs and meeting KPIs and not meeting KPIs were transport and cultural wellbeing. It's also worth saying that there are some areas, and you can look at them and say, well, historically we've actually never met the targets we have that we've set. So a classic example will be in the suburban centres. In fact, that came up in conversation the other day. So we've always been running at a resident satisfaction level of about 50-50-50. And yet our target is 60. So that begs the question of whether we have got the right number as a target, or whether in fact we're under-investing in that area. And that's one of the things we should be looking at. Where are the areas where we are overreaching our targets, and maybe we need to invest less, which is always a hard thing for council to do, and where are the areas where we are under-reaching our targets, and maybe we need to invest more, or we look at the targets themselves. Of course, we have a new set of KPIs which will be being reported on in the next quarterly report. I think finally I just wanted to touch on some of the things that got raised in questions the other day. Iona, you raised the issue around staff turnover. One of the things I would say it's very important is to remember that our staff aren't homogeneous. So there are different parts of the organisation where the staff turnover will be much higher, and you would say, well, that's fine. For example, relatively short term where you have students who work in pools, you would expect a high turnover. That's not necessarily a problem. If you got it in the core council operations, particularly in the areas that work in these buildings, I think you'd have a concern. So I think if we're going to get good information, it needs to be nuanced in that way. You also raised the issue about low levels of satisfaction with engagement. Again, that's one of the ones which has been pretty consistently, sitting around that sort of 40%-ish. Can we do something about that? I guess the challenge there is the moment we make one decision that a lot of people disagree with, they will hold that against us, not for months, not for years, but possibly for decades. And that will be the one that they will say you didn't listen, and they will beat us around the head with it, and it will go on for a very long time. So that is a challenge, and we may never get it particularly high, but we've got to keep on working to do our best and keep on saying that actually we do listen and we do change stuff, unlike some other organisations. If I looked up on the Hill, for example. Then Sarah raised the issue around regional trails framework, and that's not actually something which has come before this council formally, so that might be something you might want to think about. I certainly believe it should come before this council formally, because I think there are a couple of areas where it is deficient, and I think that will give it more status than it has. Well, it will give us a status that it's been given at the moment, but it would actually warrant that status. And you also raised the issues around centres, which I've already covered. And building consents was the other one that got raised in questions. There was concern about that we are not meeting the 100% on time target. I have to say that it's always good to be on time, but the more important thing with building consents is that we get it right. And the blunt reality is that building consents, some people would say, oh, building consents cost a fortune, that's terrible, isn't it, you rapacious councils. The truth of the matter is that building consents cost this council a fortune, and it's not a small fortune, it's a huge fortune. It is a huge area of risk for this council, and it is one of the things that finance, audit and risk management are actually going to be workshopping later on this calendar year, because we need to look at this and we need to try and get those liabilities down. That's one of the areas of risk that the council faces. So anyway, again, thanks to all the people who've put a lot of work into this, to the subcommittee members and to the staff, and it's my pleasure to move it.
Thank you. Who'd like to second? Mayor Lester, do you wish to speak?
Just very briefly, Andy's done a good job of acknowledging all those involved, including the staff, so thank you to them, to Audit New Zealand, to carrying the team, thank you. But also to Andy, thank you for doing a good job with the members of the Farms Committee, for doing a great job of chairing that subcommittee. Well done. I want to applaud your effort as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Calvi-Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to remark on the transport chapter, and Councillor Foster's right about not being overly crowing about achievements. Sometimes one finds that the chosen metrics actually belie the successes of a particular endeavour. And in the case of transport, I'm particularly proud of the achievements of our officers right across the piece in transport. Look, the financial year that has closed, the one that's being reported on, has still been bedevilled by the after effects of the earthquake. Our officers have done a lot of work supporting the reconstruction of buildings and the subsequent road closures, etc., related to those. Equally importantly, and more importantly for the future, hopefully in the absence of another big earthquake, is the storm events that are becoming a part and parcel of climate change. And it is noted in the report the work that was done on Nio Gorge, and there will be others. So there are significant challenges ahead in the transport area, and I feel that looking at the quality work that was done in strengthening Nio Gorge, and is still being done, of course, we should pay tribute to our engineers and their contractors for difficult and potentially hazardous work occasioned to a large extent by climate change. Parking, my colleague Councillor Dawson remarked that it's one of the most difficult areas, of course, in Council's operation, and I've remarked to other colleagues that once upon a time when we had a traffic and parking portfolio leader, before even Andy Foster's time, if that's possible, those councillors usually only did one term because they were the butt of the criticism of the general public. But look, I think there's a growing feeling now amongst the community that our future in transport lies in public transport and sustainable transport. So finally, I'd just like to acknowledge the work that our officers have done to support the Greater Wellington Regional Council's endeavours, and I stress the word endeavours, to create a better public transport network in Wellington. Sadly, just as Sesqui 1990 has become part of the New Zealand lexicon or the Wellington lexicon, I hope Bustastrophe 2018 won't be similarly recognised, but if it is, it won't be for the want of City Council officers and City Councillors for trying to make the most and help to make the most of that transition. So in closing, finally, also goes without saying, but a big thank you to my colleague Andy Foster for chairing the committees and having that steady hand on it, and to the officers, of course.
Thank you. Councillor Free.
Yes, I also just want to thank the staff, which has already been said, but there's just an enormous amount of work that goes into something like this, and it has been gone through, you know, time and time again, but no doubt there'll still be one or two things we'll discover. Just as a little bit more background to this, we did look in quite a lot of depth. We had a working party to look at some of the key performance indicators that sit behind this report, and I believe that next year we're going to see a much more streamlined set of performance indicators and also a bit better coverage across the subsections that are reported on. And just the comment that's been made before about some of the targets we score in the red or negatively I believe, because some of our targets are actually need to be looked at. They've never been met, but so time and time again we're actually scoring in the red. Some of them actually are capable of being met, so I think there's a case to be look at them again too. So I think it's a good report, it's reasonably clear, and you know, there has been, just to make the point again, there's been an enormous amount of work behind it.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, I just want to raise the two issues I raised on Tuesday in relation to how we describe the increased funding for organisations delivering programs and services which address sexual and gender-based violence. I'd really like an assurance from the portfolio leader, who's obviously listening attentively, that we change the language to prevent and deal with sexual and gender-based violence. And also, that's on page 23, and also a really clear description of the campaign that we were involved in around Don't Guess the Yes, which is not about raising awareness about sexual violence through videos. It's actually about educating people about the importance of free and voluntary consent. So I'd like an assurance that both of those editorial changes will be made. I think they more adequately and accurately reflect the reality. And finally, just reading this annual report, I think in the future it would be really lovely to see some of our community agencies and community leaders that we reward through various awards during the year profiled in the annual report, as they are, you know, really what makes Wellington and what makes the work of the council. So I appreciate it's too late for this year, but I just encourage that in the future.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Foster, do you need a right of reply?
First of all, Justin, thank you. And sorry, Karen, I should have said thank you for all the work that you've put in as well, you and the audit team. It's been very much appreciated. So, Chris, thank you for your words too, and I absolutely endorse what you said about we have a great team of staff right across the board, but particularly having worked with the transport team for a long time, they are a very fine group of people who do a wonderful job on behalf of the city, and it's not an easy job too. If there's anything that's in the glare of the public, it's that. Sarah, yes, we do have new KPIs and new performance indicators that we will be seeing coming through, as I said, in the next quarterly report. And you're right, as I said, there might be some of the target levels, and I don't think we've actually set all the target levels with the new numbers. We'll just check that, but we've got to make sure that the targets are encouraging better performance, but not completely unreasonable, and that's always a challenge. And Fleur, yes, if you can just email those through to myself and Lloyd, that'd be great. And Lloyd was nodding. I said, yeah, okay. Lloyd was nodding at that we can accommodate those things in the document. It's not too late to do that.
Thank you. All right, so if you could vote now.
Yep, it's carried.
Carried. Excellent. Thank you. Right, so that concludes our meeting. We're just going to take a 10-minute break while the staff set up for the council meeting. So I think morning tea's available. Thank you, colleagues.
expecting for this to take too long. I will just remind you we are being recorded again. I'll open with a karakia. Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga, kia makina kina ki uta, kia mataratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Remembering councillors that we are voting by division electronically today. You're all au fait with the new technology. Well done. Apologies. I'll move apologies from Councillor Young, Councillor Calvert. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Foster. All those in favour, please press 1. Woohoo. It's carried. Are there no announcements today? Any conflict of interest declarations, councillors? No? I'll move that we confirm the minutes from the meeting of the 29th of August 2018, having been circulated, taken and read. It's confirmed as an accurate record. I have a seconder. Councillor Marsh. All those in favour, please press 1. I declare that carried. There is one item that's not on the agenda, councillors, because the recommendations of this morning's CSC committee were not available when the agenda was prepared. So we have to vote to allow the recommendations move on to the agenda. So I move the motion that the council receives the recommendations from the meeting of all of 10-15 minutes ago. They can't be deferred because the annual report is required to be adopted. Seconder, Councillor Fitzsimons. I'll now put the motion, which has been moved and seconded. Is there any debate? No? Please push 1 if you're in favour. That's carried. There's no public participation. Okay, we'll now move to the report of the Strategy Committee meeting of 15 minutes ago. And I'll move the motion. You'll see the recommendations. Sorry, a second, you put nothing. See the recommendations in front of you. I'm happy to move. Councillor Pannett should second. I thank Councillor Pannett. Before we put the motion, I'll invite Karen Young from Audit New Zealand to come forward and deliver her unmodified audit opinion. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I'm very pleased to report that we've completed our audit of Wellington City Council's annual annual report, and that we have, and we intend to issue an unmodified audit opinion once the council adopts its annual report. I'd like to acknowledge and thank you, management and staff, for the excellent cooperation and assistance that we received during the audit. The annual report is a huge undertaking, and on the back of your consultation document and your long-term plan. We worked with many council management and staff who in fact prepared all 3 documents. Having your auditors in the council for 9 months is very courageous. So I thank you very much, and my team have very much enjoyed working with the council, and congratulations on your annual report. It was an excellent process. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Karen. Appreciate your assistance, and given it's your first time up here, you pretty much nailed it.
Thank you, Your Worship.
You're welcome. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any debate? No recommendations? No? All those in favour, please press 1. Just what?
In just a moment. Now you can go. Councillor Free, could you try again, please?
Councillor Panner. I declare those recommendations carried. We can now assign the letter of representation. Thank you very much, Karen, for the audit report.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It's now been signed, if not quite sealed and delivered. Councillors, that is the end of the meeting. I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.